yet still have a future. We develop what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, where we entertain entirely contradictory thoughts. Part of us knows and accepts that we are dying, but another part of us feels and thinks that we still have a future. It is as though our brains are hardwired for hope, or at least a part of them is. As death approaches, our sense of self can start to disintegrate. Some psychologists and philosophers maintain that this sense of self, of being coherent individuals free to make choices, is little more than a title page to the great musical score of our subconscious, a score with many obscure, often dissonant voices. Much of what we think of as real is a form of illusion, a consoling fairy story created by our brains to make sense of the myriad stimuli from inside and outside us under the unconscious mechanics and impulses of our brains. Some even claim that consciousness itself is an illusion, but it is not real, that it is a trick played on us by our brain. But I do not understand what they mean by this. A good doctor will speak to both the dissonant selves of a dying patient, the part that knows it is dying and the part that hopes it will yet live. A good doctor will neither lie nor deprive the patient of hope, even if the hope is only of life for a few more days. But it is not easy, and it takes time, with many long silences. Busy hospital wards where most of us are still doomed to die are not good places in which to have such conversations. As we lie dying, many of us will keep a little fragment of hope alive in a corner of our minds, and only near the very end do we finally turn our face to the wall and give up the ghost. Chapter 1. The Lockkeeper's Cottage. The cottage stands on its own by the canal, derelict and empty, the window frames rotten and hanging off their hinges, and the garden a wilderness. The weeds are as high as my chest and hid, I was to discover, 50 years of accumulated rubbish. It faces the canal and the loch, and behind it is a lake, and beyond that a railway line. The property company that owned it must have paid somebody to clear out the inside of the cottage, and whoever had done the work had simply thrown everything over the old fence between the garden and the lake, so the lakeside was littered with rubbish. A mattress, a disemboweled vacuum cleaner, a cooker, legless chairs and rusty tins and broken bottles. Beyond the junk, however, lay the lake, lined by reeds, with 2 white swans in the distance. I first saw the cottage on a Saturday morning. A friend had told me about it. She had seen that it was for sale and knew that I was looking for a place where I could establish a woodworking workshop in Oxford to help me cope with retirement. I parked my car beside the bypass and walked along the flyover, deafening cars and trucks rushing past me, to find a small opening in the hedge, almost invisible at the side of the road. There was a long line of steps covered in leaves and beech mast under a dark archway formed by the low, bending branches of beech trees leading down to the canal. It was as though I was suddenly dropping out of the present and returning to the past. The roar of the traffic became abruptly muted as I descended to the quiet and still canal. The cottage was a few hundred yards away along the towpath over an old brick-built humpback canal bridge. There were several plum trees in the garden, one of them growing up through an obsolete and rusty old machine with reciprocating blades like a hedge trimmer for cutting heavy undergrowth. It had 2 big wheels with Allen's and Oxford stamped on the rims in large letters. My father had had exactly the same model of machine, which he used in the 2-acre garden and orchard where I had grown up less than 1 mile away in the 1950s. He once accidentally ran over a little shrew in the grass of the orchard as I stood watching him, and I remember my distress at seeing its bleeding body and hearing its piercing screams as it died. The cottage looks out over the still and silent canal and the heavy black gates of a narrow loch. There is no road access. It can only be reached along the towpath on foot or by barge. There is a brick wall with drinking troughs for horses along one side of the garden, facing the canal. I found later the metal rings to which the horses which towed the barges along the canal would have been tethered. A long time ago, the lockkeeper would have been responsible for the gates, but the lockkeeper's cottages along the canal have all been sold off, and the gates are now left to be operated by whoever is on the passing by.